Hello and welcome to this evening. It is the final session of our Friendship February month, where we've been exploring different aspects of friendship. And this evening, we are really, really pleased to be joined by Robin from the Campaign to End Loneliness. Robin leads the work at the campaign and works to improve the evidence about loneliness, developing the community of organisations and make the case for action on the issue. The Campaign to End Loneliness works with all kinds of organisations, whether it's the World Health Organization, small charities or businesses who all want to make a difference. And thinking about the idea around friendship, or one of the other sides of friendship, is what happens when you don't feel that that connected, and that can create that feeling of loneliness. So we thought it was only appropriate and pertinent and very useful to have Robin here to explore some of the amazing work that this organisation's done. So I'd like to welcome Robin and thank you for joining us this evening on Midweek Matters.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yes, so my name's Robin Hewings and I'm from the Campaign to End Loneliness. What I'm going to be talking about this evening is a bit of a kind of an introduction to loneliness. So some of the kind of basic kind of definitions, but also about how loneliness can make us feel and how it can affect our psychology. I'm also going to talk about the risk factors for loneliness, but then moving on to some slight, and also about loneliness at work, which I think will be relevant for some of you as a kind of adults living with cerebral palsy, and then finishing up with slightly more positively with some tips about what we can do about loneliness in our own life. And also just a kind of a very quick overview of the many ways in which kind of charities and government have an important role to play in tackling loneliness as well. This is not just something where it is at all sensible just to kind of leave this up to individuals. Equally, it isn't the case that we're just kind of powerless in the face of government and wider kind of forces in society. So just give me a moment or two while I fiddle about sharing my screen, because I've got some slides. Just want to kind of acknowledge some very generous funding we've had over the years from the remarkably from the EU. It's just coming to an end now, unfortunately. So yes, so Miriam has already introduced us, and I think the key thing I want to say is that we were formed by a variety of organisations, including Sense, local government and charities as well, because what people could see is that lots of people were interested in loneliness, but there wasn't a place for people to kind of come together around this issue. And so the point of us has always been that we are about the evidence, about building up the community of people who care about this issue and making the case for action. But what we are very deliberately not about is trying to kind of duplicate or take away from the work of the many different organisations who provide services or support directly to individuals. The point of us is that is not what we do. We are about these things around kind of evidence and community building. So I think that I think almost all of us have a kind of quite a good intuitive understanding of loneliness, but there's a kind of our kind of technical dictionary definition here, which I think is just useful just to unpack and just can help us to think a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about loneliness. So just breaking this down, the first thing is that loneliness is subjective. It's about a feeling, it's about how we feel about the world, and it's not something that it's not about something you can't tell someone that they're wrong, they're not lonely. And equally, people can be quite happy in situations that other people might not like. Secondly, it's an unwelcome feeling. It's never a nice feeling to be lonely. If we've been lonely for a significant period of time, that will always be a really difficult period of our lives. And the idea is that it's about a gap between the social connections that we have, that we want, and those that we have. And so you can be lonely classically in a crowd. There might be lots of people you're talking to, you might not feel connected to them. Similarly, people can sometimes be perfectly happy living really quite isolated lives. And I think it's really important that we kind of respect the different needs that people have. The other thing as well is that it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. And so sometimes the reason why people might be lonely isn't because of a lack of relationships, but because of kind of bad relationships. For example, particularly among school children, kind of bad relationships and bullying are drivers of loneliness much more than a kind of lack of social interaction. So just kind of recapping that. So loneliness is a kind of normal human emotion. We think that loneliness, there's been some really good research working with all kinds of really, really different types of people. So isolated Japanese teenagers, Mexican migrants, people in high income countries like ours, people who've been displaced in sub-Saharan Africa. And what's common, and there's obviously differences in how people talk about it and exactly what causes loneliness amongst the kind of whole variety of human societies, but it would also appear to be a kind of a universal human emotion, that it's a normal part of being human. I think other important things which are important to say is that anyone can experience loneliness, but there are risk factors, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. I think it's also not a personal failing, and I think when you're feeling lonely, it can often feel a bit like that, but I think the truth is really that it is not. But I suppose the good news is that there are a number of things that we can do about loneliness in our own lives, and we think that also there's a lot that can be done in the more kind of organised bits of society, so by government, by charities, that can make a real difference. And so just kind of distinguishing loneliness from a couple of other kind of ideas. So we talk about social isolation, so when someone has very, very few social contacts, that's kind of different to loneliness. The social isolation is more about numbers of interactions. Loneliness is more about how they feel. Solitude is when someone is kind of happy being alone, and can also be a really important part of life. We're the campaign to end loneliness. We're not the campaign to make people constantly talk to each other all the time. I say that as someone who likes quiet time themselves a good deal. And that loneliness is about is more about kind of quality of connections. And so I'm going to, the next, I think, really kind of key thing about loneliness is, and one of the reasons why it's something where people do really need and benefit from support, is because loneliness affects how we understand the world around us. So in this example, someone's kind of going through life, and something has happened in their life that has caused them to be lonely. And then the real risk is that when you're lonely, the world feels like a kind of scary place. And we think that there's kind of good reason to think that this is very much in our evolution, that we kind of are kind of social creatures, and feeling well connected to the group around us is vitally important to our safety. And if we don't feel well connected to the group around us, it's a really very deeply stressful situation. And when we're in that kind of stress, it can be, people tend to think about the interactions that they're having more negatively. So just for example, if you go into a new situation and you're feeling lonely, you'll have the idea of a new social situation will often feel quite overwhelming. And also when you're there, you'll be much more likely to notice, or certainly to perceive, if any kind of negativity. So if you're not feeling lonely and feeling quite happy with the world, for example, if someone says they want to go and get a drink, you say, great, that's lovely, they're going to go get a drink and I'm going to go and talk to this other person. But if you're feeling lonely, you might think, well, why is that? Is that something to do with me, or why are they being so rude? And that can just really kind of cut through our kind of self-confidence. And then afterwards, perhaps if you're not lonely, you might just say, well, I went to this party, it was fine. Because if you are lonely, people are much more likely to brood on it and think about it and replay situations, and all of that kind of can mean that it's much harder for people to correctly understand their situation. And it can also mean that people can get kind of stuck because they have this kind of downward spiral of negative thoughts and feelings, which can influence your behavior, and how basically people want to withdraw. Sometimes kind of very more physically withdraw. We can also kind of more psychologically withdraw. So you might carry on being around people, but you might withdraw from their connection. And that can lead to people being lonely for really long periods of time. In the jargon, we call that kind of chronic loneliness. And this is a deeply damaging situation for people to be in. And I think this quote here just kind of sums it up, about how when we're lonely, we can want to get out and about, but when it actually kind of comes to it, the idea of it can just feel really, really overwhelming. So I thought that it might be an idea, I think I've been speaking for 10-15 minutes, just have a brief pause here and see if there's any questions about what I've just been saying. If not, I've got plenty more to start talking about. So if there isn't, if you don't anything, if there's nothing you particularly want to kind of share with the group or ask about me for clarification, then it's fine for us to move on. I'll just stop the share just while we're at this point.
So if anybody wants to ask any questions, Claire, did you want to come in and make your comment?
I can do, yeah. I was just going to say, when you were saying about noticing, when you go places, noticing negativity, I think it's a bit of a vicious circle for me, because, you know, I've had various experiences over the years for various reasons, discrimination, bullying, various things in school and in work, and, well, various circumstances where I've been told I'm rude or bullshit or things like that. So I'm certainly someone who worries about how I come across to others and what others think of me. As much as people tell me, like, people are always saying to me, oh, don't worry about what others think. But I'm like, but I've had these experiences that tell me otherwise, you know? So yeah, it's quite a kind of battle to see past that sometimes. And on your last slide as well, about sort of getting ready and then not going out, I find that I I'm a member of a choir on a Thursday evening. I work Monday to Thursday, and the number of times, like, I'm driving home from work, I'm all sort of geared up to go to choir, and then I have my dinner or something, and yeah, like you say, get my bag ready or whatever, and then it's like, oh no, I'm just going to sit and watch telly tonight. But again, I overanalyze as well, even at choir. I overanalyze like my performance and everything. So it's a bit of a combination of things, quite complex.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I should have said earlier that this is a really difficult topic to talk about. And yeah, I think you've really just kind of exemplified how those types of experiences can really stay with us, and how they can really kind of make it difficult to get out. Thank you.
Before we go on, Robin, I just wanted to check, Avril, you did have your hand up and then it disappeared. Was that purposeful, or I don't want to pick on you?
I want to see.
Oh, can you say that again?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to say,
Anna, we can't quite hear you. Could you come a bit closer?
yeah, no problem. Hear me now?
Might work. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm from Wolverhampton, and the issue I have is like the social aspect. Like you know, it would be only like online basis, and it would really develop from there. And like my friends, I promises, and you know, so I'll get quite frustrated.
I'm really sorry, Anil. The sound was just kind of coming and going. I was understanding a little bit about what you're saying. I think you're saying that you were possibly reaching out online. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. I missed the second half, I think.
Yeah, basically the only get is to connect with my friends. It's like online, and like whenever now I try either they say, oh, they're very busy, or they're time, etc.
Mm.
Okay. I think the sound was really kind of coming and going. I think you were just saying that you connect with people online, but meeting offline is more difficult because people are often busy. I'm just putting it together. Okay, yeah. No, I can imagine that is also a really challenging and difficult situation. And yeah, and you know the people online, are they? And I think you mentioned that you live in Wolverhampton. Is that right? Are they in Wolverhampton or elsewhere?
They're local.
Right.
They're in Wolverhampton. They could at least you know, spare like a couple of hours. You know, it's not even just going for a coffee or everything just
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. I think kind of, particularly if people have got different amounts of time, these things can be difficult, and it can be difficult to not let that weigh upon your mind, can't it?
Because I think sometimes, I don't know if you agree, Robin, sometimes we think the issues are about us, but it might be that something's going on in their life that makes it more difficult for them to get out and meet face to face. It might not all be about how you feel.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that people often have their own kind of issues that can be really challenging for them, and it can be hard for them to get out. They might be worried about all kinds of things. It might be time, money, work, and all of that can kind of make us get stuck. But yes, we naturally often think that it's something to do with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry the sound was a little bit wasn't working very well.
And I've got Richard with his hand up too.
Yes, what I was going to say, Robin, is quite a lot of the time, even if you do go out, people's reaction to you, able-bodied people's reaction to you, can still be quite negative. And I think I've come to the conclusion that the reason for that is that they're still not used to disabled people being out and about. I think it's only in the last 30 to 40 years that the likes of me, or us, in other words, started to go to mainstream schools. And so those of us who were good enough started to go to universities and things like that and got degrees. If you look at where people with cerebral palsy were about 50 years ago, I think most of them went to mainstream school, stayed with their parents for as long as their parents could help them, and then they went into residential care for the rest of their life and were largely hidden from the world. The idea that disabled people are now out and about, have things to do and lead relatively normal lives within the confines of their disability is still, particularly for the older generation, is still a very new phenomenon. You always get, when you go to the supermarket, the elderly people still look at you as if something, how can you be here, and all the rest of it, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's, well, you'll know that 5 million times better than I would, but I can well imagine that's true. And also I can imagine, and I think that kind of a general issue across loneliness is that discrimination cuts very deeply, and when people have been discriminated against, it kind of undermines your kind of trust in other people, and is a real driver of loneliness. And you can kind of see it in a number of different ways across society. And obviously you're just talking about it very clearly in this context. And thanks, Claire, just for adding that point in the chat about that you feel better for going. And there really is research actually that we underestimate systematically as human beings the extent to which other people like us, and also the extent to which we will kind of enjoy our social interactions. There's always that kind of moment of dread beforehand, but more often than not, we're kind of pleased that we did have that meet up for someone with coffee, or go to that group, or even just chat to that person in the street. Brilliant. Okay, thank you ever so much for sharing quite challenging issues for someone who is a newcomer to this group. There's a few more bits I'm going to talk about, and so and then hopefully and I'm confident that we'll be kind of finishing on time with some time for kind of reflection in the group as well. So I'm just going to do that fiddly bit of sharing my screen, which is always still just takes a moment. So so we'll talk about the kind of impact of loneliness on our psychology. I think that one thing which has happened to loneliness as an issue in the last decade is that it's become much clearer that loneliness is a risk factor for physical health problems, which are kind of comparable to other big risk factors that we worry about a great deal, and particularly if you put it together with social isolation and living alone, then you're kind of up into the kind of smoking territory. I actually used to work on kind of reducing smoking, and I was used to kind of joke that the good thing about it was that almost nothing was as bad as smoking, so you could do whatever you wanted, except actually for kind of having good social relationships. And I think that might initially seem a bit odd. Like, we can always see how, yeah, something like smoking is bad for you because you put all these chemicals in and they give you cancer and heart disease and so on. And so it seems a bit like, why would loneliness and social isolation have kind of similar effects? And there's kind of three main ways. The first one is that being lonely makes it harder to do the sometimes slightly boring things that you need to do to look after your health. And whatever that is, there's studies linking loneliness and social isolation with people going to the doctors at the right time. Sometimes people who are lonely go to the doctor when actually the real driver is loneliness, but sometimes people put off going to the doctor. We're often motivated to do these things by the person around us. I think I might say particularly men. But also, if you want to persuade, for example, I mentioned earlier that I've worked on smoking before, and if you want to motivate someone to give up smoking, often the things that people find most motivating, most effective, are to do with, for example, things in your social life, being around to look after people who you care about, being around to see milestones in your children's lives. Those are the things which is actually, we don't really do things for ourselves. We do things, we're much more motivated by people around us. And then the other two reasons are, the other one is that I was talking earlier about how that kind of, those feelings of anxiety can affect us psychologically. That can also feed into, for example, kind of how well we sleep, and so then they're kind of, if you're sleeping badly, that then has physical knock-on effects. And then finally, is that the kind of being lonely increases our levels of stress. It goes with feelings of threat, which then have kind of a physiological basis. That you can, there are differences in the kind of brains of people who are lonely to people who are not lonely, and over time those feelings of stress, feelings of threat, have a physiological effect on us that has, as I say, kind of longer term impacts on our physical health. And then also loneliness has a relationship with our mental health. It's quite a kind of, it goes both ways. So being depressed makes you more likely to be lonely, and being lonely makes you more likely to be depressed. And I think that there's emerging evidence that helping people with both, as it were, their kind of depression or social anxiety, alongside helping people with their social connections, can help people recover better from kind of mental health problems as well. So then now I want to talk a little bit about why people are lonely, and there is still, just to start this, there is still some impact from the pandemic. The way in which it shut us off from each other meant that for some people it's been really quite hard to recover from that. The pattern that we saw through the pandemic was, and I was particularly in relation to the loneliness that we most worry about, that chronic loneliness, people saying that their lives just feel lonely. That kind of loneliness didn't go up at the beginning of the pandemic because it was still quite new, and even if we didn't feel great, we could remember a time not so long ago when things were kind of okay. But what we found is that loneliness went up really quite a lot in the kind of winter lockdowns of the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. And then what we found is that it has got a bit better since then, but it has very definitely not gone back to what it was before, because I think, at least for some people, it's been really hard to pick up perhaps where they left off. Particularly with younger people, there's examples of them having fewer friendships, fewer relationships, and that seems, pardon me, sorry, that's my phone, just give me one moment. And it seems to have a long-lasting effect, particularly on people who are already at higher risk of loneliness. And then the other kind of three main factors are that loneliness can be caused quite a lot by change and transition. So moving to a new place, starting a new job, and as I'm just going to go through a richer set of those. Some people react differently to different situations depending upon their psychology. So the way in which people think about their loneliness, for example, can make them more likely to stay lonely or get out of loneliness. And this is not a kind of a judgment on them. It's just kind of how different people respond to things. So if you're lonely and you think that this is what your life is like, this is what you're like, this is the kind of thing that is always happening to you. And if you think that if it's kind of your fault, it can be much harder to get out of loneliness. Whereas if you think that loneliness is because of an external reason, it's not something to do with me, it's because I moved house, or this relationship ended, or whatever, and you're optimistic that it'll get better, that does seem to kind of help people to kind of break out of that spiral. But like I say, I kind of say it because it's kind of in literature, but I do always kind of have a hesitation that it could feel like kind of blaming. And then finally, and we were just touching on this a little bit before, society can exclude people, and you can see that really clearly in people who are kind of lesbian, gay, bisexual, you'll get slightly different answers from different surveys, but really quite consistently 2 or 3 times more likely to be chronically lonely than people who are straight. With people from ethnic minorities, it's a more complex picture, but what really kind of is, what does come through very, very clearly is that if people feel that they've been discriminated against or particularly kind of harassed, then the way in which that makes you lose trust in people around you means that that can cut very deeply. And also being disabled is a really significant factor in can make people a good deal more lonely. And the other risk is that is when these factors kind of add up. So younger people are often a bit more lonely. If you put that together with being disabled, put that together with not being in employment, these things all kind of add up to making people, all these factors kind of add up into making people much more likely to be lonely. And I think it really is something which I think we would say to government is really important in terms of how they kind of target support and help. So I'm just going to then just talk a bit about some of the transitions that make us more likely to be lonely. As you can see from this nicely drawn slide here, there is a lot, and they can happen right across our lives. So kind of you can see starting off from the top left, kind of being unhappy at school can be a big driver of loneliness. Teenagers are some of the loneliest people because there's so much kind of change in relationships and social pressures. It would probably also seem that social media can be really unhelpful here in a couple of ways. Firstly, through the jargon is upwards social comparison, by which I mean comparing yourself to other people social media, but kind of, as it were, but in that kind of way of thinking, well, their lives look brilliant, so why doesn't mine? And kind of finding it hard to kind of screen out the fact that people tend to put on their best versions of themselves on social media. And the second way in which it seems to be having an impact is the way that it means that kind of bullying can kind of follow people all around. That bullying 20 years ago would obviously be very upsetting, but there was some sense in which at least it kind of might stop at home, whereas obviously now it can kind of follow people into their bedrooms and be something which they can just not get away from. Then, as I say, there's a whole set of things which change your social relationships. That might be moving, it might be retirement, it might be changing jobs, it might be kind of different types of relationships breaking down. All of these can be real risk factors for loneliness. And something that we found doing some research in London recently is that having really kind of overwhelming kind of worries about housing or about money can feel really isolating as well, because of that sense that there's kind of no one who you can kind of relate to talk to about these issues. And then finally, kind of being bereaved is also a really significant driver of loneliness. And so what we see about kind of loneliness across the life course is that on average, and I really do stress that on average, people are lonelier when they're younger. And as we move into middle life, people typically become less lonely. And then in later life, particularly if people are becoming frail or bereaved, then people then become more likely to be lonely. I've spoken for another 15 minutes or so, and so I think it'd be an idea if we had a bit of a break just to see about how much that resonated, or if there's things that people would like to share with the group. Equally, if there's nothing, I would like to say, if there's nothing you want to share with the group, I'm sure that Miriam and Emma would say that that's absolutely up to you as well. So I'll just pause there, I'll end the share, and if there's thoughts or questions that people have, then do please ask them.
So-
Mandy, do you want to go first? Sorry, Emma.
Into it.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mandy, yes.
Just when you were saying there about the different reasons, what if you're worried about someone else's loneliness? How do you help them?
So actually, that's a really good question. It's something we'll be coming on to later. Is the final bit is the kind of what you can do about loneliness. I think that I suppose I'm not going to give too much away to say that almost anything you do will be helpful. And even if you're not going to kind of solve all of someone's problems, even just quite light bits of support can really make a difference. I think it's a real example of that kind of phrase that it's important that the best is not the enemy of the good, if you know what I mean, and that it's really worth. You don't have to suddenly make someone not lonely at all. Even if you're just helping them just a bit on that day, it can be a really worthwhile thing to do.
I'll tell you what it is. It was something that you mentioned. It was my mother died about 6 years ago now. And my dad is widowed, and he's just they were together for years and years, and so now he's living alone and he's retired, and he just seems very lost without her, and he actually comes out and says, I'm lonely. He tells you that he's lonely, And then I make suggestions like, go for a walk, Dad, or go for a drive, or, you know, he used to play golf, but now he's too old and it's too much for him. So me and my sister make suggestions to try and like get him, like he's a member of the church, so he's quite involved in the church, but he'll like go to the service and then just come home. So we like say, why do you not stay for tea or something like that? And it was like, you don't understand, like what you were saying, it's a feeling. And it doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't seem to make a huge bit of difference. But because I'm in the wheelchair and everything, it does come round to my house. Like my husband's at work, my daughter's at school. So I'm in the house and I don't drive and things. So he comes round and he kind of helps me, like with like my dishes or my hoovering. But really, I don't need him to do this. But I let him do it because I think it's helping him. You know what I mean? But it's just, I really worry about it because you hear about particularly men like committing suicide and stuff. And maybe I'm overthinking it. But when he keeps on talking about how lonely he is without her, I do worry about it. So if you can suggest anything, that would be good.
Yeah, so I think that, yeah, as I say, we'll be talking about this in a little bit more depth in a little bit later. But I think, to be honest, Mandy, I think you're already doing a lot, both in terms of kind of ideas and suggestions, but also about letting him come round. That one of the things that are best in relation to helping people with loneliness as is when it's kind of reciprocal, when someone is not the case that to use kind of quite extreme kind of language, it's not the case that there's this poor person that's being helped, but that people are giving their own things as well. And so the fact that you're open to him coming around, and as you're saying, kind of doing jobs that don't really need to be done, that's actually a really nice thing to do, which will give him some purpose in his day and give him a sense of feeling valued.
Yeah, because he thinks he is helping me, but I think that it's helping him more to think that he's helping me, because he's got a point to get out of bed, and like I'll find myself phoning them up and sending them to the shop. This for them is something that I don't need, just to give me something to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what. Yeah, that's why this reminds me of my grandma a bit as well. But I think that if you can, so even if it's a bit annoying, letting those things run, I think, can be really valuable. And that sense that he's helping, I think, maybe one of the best ways to help him connect. But I think, as I say, I think that it's really important. It's much better to be doing something like what you're doing than nothing at all. And if there are any ways in which anyone else can help him be up for sticking around after church, or and not kind of going home straight away, but equally that should be kind of, it could, at least he is going to church, and that is still something. It's some purpose in the day. You've got to get dressed, you've got to look smart, you've got to go there, you've got a purpose. Those are really, I think it's a different, I think particularly when people are being bereaved, it's really hard. And I think there's can be a little bit harder for men as well, because a lot of the kind of coffee mornings and things like that can be very dominated by women, just because men die earlier. So if you're a bereaved older man, it can be really difficult to find your places. And and I think particularly if you were playing golf but can't now, it'd be difficult. But you can always go to the 19th hole, maybe. I don't know.
Thank you.
Sounds like you're being a phenomenal daughter, Mandy.
Yeah, really.
Thank you.
Becky, did you want to ask a question?
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to unmute myself.
That's fine.
It just struck me. I just wanted to say I really understand about how things layer up, different factors that can impact and combine, if you like. Yeah, and I think maybe I've sort of found how to explain it. Say if you find your disability, you need to alter your working pattern to help your disability. It can set you almost against the course of society for, well, everybody, but sometimes people in your age group, say, that would have like a different routine, or you'd be going into work full time. I found that. So yeah, it was just to say, like, in a way, I feel like I can see how it layers. It's like, in a way, it's an age thing and a disability thing and an employment thing necessarily that kind of happens, and it's interesting how it happens. Yeah, so it was just to say that.
No, good. I'm glad
Also,
that.
the sense of purpose that you mentioned, I think that's important too. So yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that makes sense. There's a couple of questions in the chat. So one of them is from Camilla about kind of references for studies that we can share. Yes, so this is the easiest answer to that is that we have a kind of facts and stats bit of our website, that this, which I'm saying now, is largely drawn upon. We draw from quite, as we kind of imagine, from quite a lot of studies to kind of distill this down. But I will, for just some of the more immediate things, I can add a link to our facts and stats page on our website. Might be some other bits which, if there's a particular fact you're looking for me to bring out, then do let me know, and I've tried to have a not bad filing system to be able to bring that out. So yeah, yeah, and I think, and Katie's made, I think, about how she's kind of worried about moving, and I think that, I suppose, what I've been doing so far is probably suggesting problems a bit more than solutions, and hopefully there'll be a little bit more solutions at the end of this, without trying to say, as I say, when I talk about the kind of ways in which one can deal with loneliness, the big thing is that it's about 5 million times easier to say these things than it is to do them. Albeit that this is kind of advice that is very much distilled from people who have been lonely and what they have helped, what they find helpful to help them deal with it as well.
Can I just ask something, Robin? Yeah. Just reading Katie's second point about her PA times, her personal assistant time, usually being weekday times when younger adults aren't doing stuff. Just taking it more to a policy kind of level, or your kind of campaigning side. I'm guessing that some of the role of your job is to talk to government and to talk to providers to think about some of these issues that I suspect that they're not thinking about, are they? In terms of thinking that they've provided a PA, or you have a PA, and then that's okay, but it's about your actual specific needs that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as I say, the kind of set or kind of community of organisations who are really keen that there's progress on this issue, a lot of that energy comes from a number of disability organisations. I think partially because the problems are so severe, and also because the way in which services work is often a bit more focused on people's kind of basic kind of physical needs, rather than the actually also very important social needs that people have as well, such as, I'm moving to a new place, how do I meet people? As if you're young adults, doing that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon may not be so particularly helpful. So yeah, so there are 2 more questions from Dean and also from Richard.
Dean, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Thank you. First of all, Robin, I want to say it's really, really good to hear what you're doing. I think I've seen you in the media before being interviewed, and I think it's really good, you know, what you're actually doing. You're actually conquering this thing, this stigma called loneliness, and it's really, really good that there's funding going into that, and you're doing it. And thank you for doing that. But I want to say about myself, when the pandemic came, I'm more or less like I've never been lonely during I never felt lonely during the pandemic, because I discovered something called Zoom when in fact everybody did, in the thousands, you know, for many different reasons, and everyone just I kept, I felt like this social butterfly on Zoom. I was going from one Zoom meeting to the next, and no one could keep up with me because I was going here, there, and everywhere. But what I was wanting to do, I was kind of wanting to, in my own mind, sort of catch up with what different people, even though people, these spent a lot of, and I didn't know these people. I wanted to get a grasp of what was happening in different sectors. So I do voluntary work in the social housing sector. So I wanted to find out what was happening there, and there was good work going on there. And obviously I joined Emma and Miriam's group up, or when it's called the Hub, before it relaunched, and meeting people has been a very positive experience for me. In fact, actually, I've never met so many people as I've met than this pandemic. It's been very, very good for me, and now I'm finding myself in a situation where I've still been in touch with my friends, you know, pre the pandemic, you know, that I've known for a long, long time. But I'm actually at the stage now where I'm kind of making arrangements to go out with people again, and that's the first time I did it was with people, someone that I had met them before, but some online on Zoom, and we met up, and that was very, very interesting, you know, experience. Well, I'm also looking forward gradually to. I have been out with some friends, and I don't take it for granted, because it's almost like I'm learning again how to no, not learning so much, but experiencing that social interaction with people without being nervous about who's going past me, or you know, or whether I'm going to get COVID or not. I don't actually think about that now when I'm with, you know, when I'm with people, because I know you said in the bit that you said about about the pandemic still being part of what's going on. You know, people are still having concerns about the pandemic, and all the places that I've been to, there is still a concern. I do get that feeling that there is still concern, because half of the pubs that I've been in, and I've only been in about 2 or 3, by the way, and they've been half empty, they've been half full. So there is still that. You could say there are other reasons for that, but there are a multitude of reasons. But I think the main reason is, you know, so you know, some people don't want to mix, and you know, you do get people who, if you are a bit close to them, they back off, or I might do the same thing. You know, it's yeah. I just wanted to share that, really. You know, you see, it's an interesting time at the moment. You know, but generally, I wouldn't like to say I wouldn't say I'd like to say it's been a good thing, because obviously it's not been a good thing for the pandemic for a lot of people. But I think I've not done bad out of it in terms of meeting people, and I'm very thankful for that.
That's great to hear, and yeah, absolutely. I think that the changes that the pandemic has made, probably such as making it normal for us to meet together in this way this evening, I think is really important. And what we're trying to achieve is trying to get the best of both worlds, from the kind of online and offline and meeting in different ways. There's a couple more questions. I'm very, very keen that we don't drift past 8 o'clock. I don't know whether maybe what we should do is just have these two questions and then I'll just kind of restart for the kind of final third, so if that's okay. So I think the next people were Richard and then Shard.
Yeah, well, someone was mentioning about PAs a few minutes ago, not being able to have enough hours. I mean, I at the moment have a living care agency, and I'm thinking about. I'm in the process of trying to move house to. I'm live in Newcastle under Lyme at the moment. I'm moving house to Oxfordshire, but I'm thinking about, because I've got other things I want to do there, like potentially do teacher training and things like that. But it's when I talked a few years ago about personal assistance to a social worker, I said, how many hours do you need? And I think to myself, well, how long is a piece of string? I need them to, I don't need somebody with me every second of the day, but when I need help, I need help. And it's not just the basic care needs, it's going out in my mobility vehicle and doing things. It's not just socializing, it's doing things like voluntary work, maybe doing, dare I say, paid work too. I mean, I don't know whether it's practical to see whether you could get, do you need to have one set of personal assistants for the home and another set of personal assistants for work? Because the thing is that the home set of personal, if you did that, the home set of personal assistant, the home-based personal assistants would have to do more if you go on holiday, if you were working. And if you worked it out so it was jointly funded by direct payments on the one hand, then access to work or disabled student allowance, depending on whether you were a student or a worker on the other hand, having the same group of people, not just one person, the same group of people with everything, you more or less be able to actually do what you've got to do when you've got to do it, where you've got to do it. And then you've got to, I think Katie just said it, you've got to find the right person, the right group of people to do it. Because it's not, it's what we're talking about isn't care in inverted commas. Personal assistance is supporting independent living, which is helping you live an independent life. And then by doing that, then you won't be lonely, will you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm the least expert person in what you're just talking about, but I do very much take your point that it's about what you need it for as much as basic hours, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would add, pardon me, is that it is Emma touched on it earlier. It is an area of massive need of exploration for so many different reasons, like you've mentioned, Richard. And it's not only socializing, it's the ability to be able to gain that work experience, that voluntary experience, that contribution as a member of society that everyone should be entitled to. And unfortunately, at this moment, the ideal doesn't match the reality. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't aim for it and request it to be explored, which I think everyone, especially within the disability community, would like to push that forwards. So I think it's very much on people's agenda, and the acknowledgement, like Katie was saying earlier, and people have said it previously in these meetings, where you can get a personal assistant time to help you with your own personal care and your activities of daily living. But if you want to go down the pub with a friend and meet them and you need an assistant, they run out of time. So, or like you're saying, to do other things. I think it's a work in progress. It's not a satisfactory answer, but it's not something, but it's people are very aware of it, Richard.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We'll see what actually happens.
Brilliant. Okay, so should we move on to Shard? Do you want to ask your question, Shard?
I just want to add to Richard's point of view about PAs as well, is that people are not finding the right people, and it's very hard to find the right support. So, and then when you get people that want to work for you, they don't want to work for you.
I think that's the example, Shard, of what what Robin was talking about earlier, about the layering effect of different things having consequences. Yeah, and I think there are lots of people in the chat that are agreeing with you about the difficulty finding PAs, and that has an impact on lots of things. Thank you.
Can I explore this option as the next topic or two in this conversation?
Shall we just let Robin I just wanted to give him time to finish up, because he wants to talk about solutions, and you know what I'm like.
Okay.
On solution, and then if we've got some time at the end, I'll remember to come back to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Yes, sorry, I'm just dealing with a small child.
Hi. 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 Hello.
Right. I'm just going to get this back onto slideshow. Right. So I just want to a bit more about solutions. I think I'm not going to go into too much detail about loneliness at work, but just to say that it's a real issue. We think that we've been working on kind of guidance and evidence about what can be done to tackle loneliness at work. It's something which is both very much, I think, in the interests of employers, because people who are lonely are more likely to be kind of absent from work. People when you're lonely at work, you're never really as engaged. And actually, people say that people who are not lonely are more likely to be kind of better colleagues. It kind of adds to the kind of sense of kind of camaraderie and mutual support that I think is so important in any good workplace. I just want to kind of reference that for here, but not so I'm not going to go through all 40 pages of my extremely interesting report about it. But just looking a bit more onto solutions. So as individuals, I think we can all help in reaching out. I mean, we've just been hearing some different examples of that. But also we think that different parts of the kind of organized parts of society, whether that's businesses or charities or different parts of government, can all think about what they do to better create places for people to connect, and also that it's very easy for them to do things that lead people to kind of not want to connect. For example, we've just been doing quite an extensive piece of work about how the built environment can help people to be less lonely, and so having that mixture of places where you can bump into people, feeling safe, and where you live is really important. Also having the places and spaces to connect, and what that is, it's like a real mixture of community organizations and voluntary organizations, but it's also about pubs and cafes, and it's about kind of libraries, and also just making sure that where we live are places that people can get about in, whether that might be making sure that places are kind of easy and straightforward to walk on, where we're not scared about tripping over pavements or getting knocked down, or being the victim of antisocial behaviour, and also that there's good and accessible public transport as well. So there's a whole set of things we think we can do. But I was asked to provide a few tips for this talk, which I'm just going to kind of run through now. So, like I say, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. And so I really don't want anyone to kind of get the impression that I'm saying, oh, well, just do this, this, and this, and you'll be fine. These are difficult things to do often. But these are kind of some of our kind of thoughts. The first one is that if you can, even if you're not feeling lonely, there's real value in kind of valuing our friendships and relationships so that they're kind of more robust for the future. So trying to make sure that if it's possible that you're not, as it were, putting all of your eggs into one basket, or you'd be very kind of being very dependent on just a kind of small number of people. It's kind of a good thing to do to kind of have some breadth. So that's kind of one kind of more kind of preventative thing that is important. But secondly, we were touching upon this earlier about how loneliness changes how we think about the world. It makes it seem like a scarier place. But there are some techniques, and as I say, this is that can help us to kind of manage some of those thoughts and feelings. And so if you can, it's worth thinking about times when you've enjoyed social interactions to kind of build up your kind of confidence and self-belief, rather than dwelling on interactions that you might be worrying about. I think it's also worth saying that one always needs to be kind to oneself, that your mind probably will often go more towards those negative things. It's worth trying to steer it back, but not blame it for going there. Other things which can be relevant, particularly if there isn't like an immediate kind of solution available, are things like kind of connecting with nature and focusing on enjoyable activities. If kind of social contact isn't something which is going to happen that day or that week. And I think that this is something which collectively, I think we all became a lot better at during COVID, when often the solution to loneliness could never have been going somewhere else or seeing someone else. Sometimes some of us got a bit sick of Zoom, some times perhaps, but there were other ways in which you could feel more connected. And as we've been saying earlier, loneliness is quite a subjective feeling, and it's mainly about our relationships with other human beings, but it can also be with the natural world. And for people who like pets, I'm not saying that you should get a dog regardless of whether you like them or not. People who like pets and like engaging with pets often say that their pets can make them feel less lonely. Other things about kind of ways out of loneliness would be, I think that we probably often think about that thing to do with loneliness is to is all about meeting new people, and that is a role for it. But that one way out of it can be connecting with people who've drifted away from a bit. It's very easy to lose touch with people in day-to-day life. Things happen, we move, we change jobs. It can be difficult keeping up with people as much as we would like. But that doesn't mean that you can't kind of get back in touch with people, and that can be a useful way forward. But if you are looking to meet new people, then one of the best ways can be, and we've heard a number of examples of it this evening, then one of the best ways through it can be through volunteering, because in that way you meet like-minded people with a real sense of purpose about why you're together. I think that often in general we don't become friends with people just for kind of social reasons. It's often through doing something together, having a shared purpose, and it probably means that you're more likely to meet people who are kind of like-minded. It really does seem to be a really vitally important way of tackling loneliness in one's own life. We've had a couple of discussions briefly already this evening about the kind of bigger kind of policy context. Obviously, that's something which is a big focus for an organisation, and I could be here for a long time talking about my many views and thoughts about ways in which loneliness can tackle policy. But just to give you kind of an overview, really, of how much there is that can be done. And I think just listening to some of you may be involved in some of these already. This is our kind of overall kind of framework for the different things that can happen to for people to not be lonely. And so if you, on the left-hand side of this framework, you can see someone who's at risk of loneliness or who might be lonely. And the first thing is that there's a role for services to reach people. People don't have a big sign above their head saying that they're lonely. And there's different ways in which people can be reached. But then the next thing is that because loneliness is so personal and so subjective, understanding and really building a rapport with people who are lonely is really important to helping kind of get out of it, because the solutions will be really, really varied from one person to another. We think there are then a kind of a set of infrastructure which, when it's in place, is helpful, and when it's not, is a real problem. And that can be, as I was just saying earlier, about the built environment. Is it safe to go out? Is it easy to go out? Are there nice places to go to? And that's a really important part of tackling loneliness. As I say, there are some issues with social media and loneliness, but in general, it is really helpful, not least because now is one of the main ways in which people find out about what's actually going on, as well as the kind of particular connections that people can have. And finally, the transport is a real issue, particularly when it's not accessible or it's too expensive. And obviously, if you have access to a car, that can be great. But if you don't, then the kind of other options in many places can be kind of nowhere near good enough. And then I think there's probably the things that we might most immediately think of when we think about what you might do about loneliness. So different types of groups, and exactly what they are is the whole brilliant, rich range of ways in which people can come together. It might be going to church. We've always had a few examples. It might be going to church, it might be going to golf. So it might be coming here as well. Exactly what it is just depends on our own interests and things that we find fun, things that we find meaningful. There can also be a role, particularly for kind of very much older and isolated people, for kind of one-to-one befriending services. And this doesn't exist nearly as much as we would like. But I was saying at the beginning how loneliness affects how we think about the world, and sometimes what people need isn't access to a bus. It's not a social group. That's all there, and that's fine. What they need is some help in just thinking through about how they think about their loneliness, and that will help them to then kind of re-engage. And in terms of what we think that can achieve, sometimes it's new connections, sometimes it's about maintaining connections, and sometimes it's about feeling better about your particular context. And some of the ways in which we can achieve that right across are making sure that our communities work for people, whether they're young or old, about approaches that really build on the assets that we already have in communities. As I say, volunteering can be a really important way in which people can deal with feelings of loneliness. Projects led by volunteers are often really, really good ones because they're so close to people's lives. And as I say, again, thinking about a neighbourhood as a whole could often be a good way to tackle loneliness. So those are the key things I wanted to say about on the kind of solutions side. I'm sure that final slide has some of our kind of wider resources, particularly about workplace wellbeing. So I'm going to stop this share. I've just been reminded, just seeing those reminded me that I said that I would pop a link to our facts page into the chat. So I'll just do that now, just while people perhaps think about whether there's any questions or points that people would like to make, just in the last kind of, I suppose, what, 5-6 minutes that we've got.
I think David had a question. His hand is up.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't a question, it was just to say that I'm David and I run a buddying scheme for disabled people in South East London. It's very new. Well, I say it's new. We've been operating for about a year, and we, at the moment, we work with social prescribers to get our referrals, and we've had about 12 or 15 successful matches. So how it works is we provide telephone, video, and face-to-face support. So we start when we find someone, we met them. So the volunteers at the moment are non-disabled volunteers, which is not ideal, but we met those volunteers with disabled people, and they speak for a period of about 4 weeks over the phone for about half an hour, just to get to know each other, get to know their interests, etc. Or they might speak on the telephone, they might speak via Zoom, and then if they're a match and they get on, etc., then they move on to face-to-face contact that we've had some people go out. So the face-to-face activities we offer could be simple as going for a walk, or meeting for coffee, or going to cinema, theatre, football match, etc. And what we haven't quite got to the stage of going to a social event like a concert or football match, but what people are doing is they're going out for walks, they're meeting for coffee. We've had someone go out for pizza, we've had someone go out for bowling. So that's what the service is at the moment. It's called Buddies for All. So you can Google that, leave it in the chat. But it's not launched. I don't want to influx of self-referrals at the moment because we're not ready. So I just wanted to come here tonight to sort of give you an overview of it. And yeah, that's what we're doing. So I'd be quite interested to have a chat with Robin and Miriam and Emma, aside from this conversation, about if you could help me move it forward.
Yes, absolutely. And just on the kind of more organisational front, we help to run a kind of an online hub for people who are working to tackle loneliness. And obviously I'm happy to help, but there's also, we're helping to create a wider community of people who can help with create that kind of support and ideas and sharing that that you're looking for. And yeah, and it's brilliant to hear that you're working well with social prescribing. I think in that graph the framework I just showed, what it's one of the lessons of it is that no one can do everything, and often it's about linking up with other parts of this system. So as you say, you're providing the kind of one-to-one support, and how do people find out about it? Well, linking up with the kind of linking services, social prescribing is really important.
So I would just I don't know if we can exchange email addresses or something so we can have further conversation, but if we can take that away from this chat, that would be good.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Cool. Thank you. And I'll put my website in the chat, but as I say, I'm not really taking referrals on at the moment. So I know some people might be keen to have a body, particularly as it fills that gap between social care and having someone to go out for a drink with. But at the moment, we're just not ready for that. But I'll put the website in the chat anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, David. And certainly drop us an email and we'll definitely have a conversation.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Just having a look. Robin, can you see anybody? Shard, is that historic, that hand?
These are, yes, in the phrase legacy hands.
Oh yeah, it's a historic. I didn't put it down.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. That's no problem.
I've never done that.
I've got a question anyway. Because I'm ethnic minority, I would like to know the statistics of like how many people are lonely in the UK. I'm from an Arabic background, so I would like to know if you have any Arabic statistics in the UK to do with loneliness, or not yet.
So, so in relation to ethnic minorities, as I say, different surveys will find slightly different things, but I think the evidence is that loneliness is higher amongst people from ethnic minorities, although obviously that's a very, it's an almost preposterously wide kind of category of people. As I say, I think some particular risk factors if you've just moved here, if
No.
feel discriminated against. So in relation to what you're saying about, I don't think I have it with Arabic people in the UK specifically. However, one thing that we're doing is we have a growing kind of global network of organisations who are kind of similar to the Campaign to End Loneliness, and I think we're having some conversations just in the next couple of weeks actually with some people who work in the Middle East and North Africa. So we're trying to create some of those links there.
Keep me posted.
I will.
And I've just noticed that Janine has just popped her hand up and you've got a minute to go, Janine. So did you want to ask your last question? Oh, Janine, we can't hear you.
No, we can't hear you now.
You're not on mute. It might be going to the wrong microphone.
Your settings might be wrong in you might have to adjust your settings.
I don't think the mic is showing. It's showing the bell thing. It's not showing the mic. I don't know why.
Janine, do you want to pop it in the chat? Can you type? I can't remember. Are you able to do that?
Great question, Janine. So in general, I think, as I said, I'll say at the beginning that in general we are about connecting existing organisations and trying not to take away from things that are already happening. Sometimes we do have people who do volunteer with us, though, in different ways. So, for example, sometimes people speak in the media on our behalf, and also we also have a very kind woman who works with us on a podcast about loneliness as well. So there are some things that we do work with volunteers, but probably less intensively than many other loneliness organisations. As I say, just because of what we do. But I've just put my email in the chat already, but I'll just do it just again now. And if you'd like to have any kind of further conversation about that, then that would be great.
Fabulous. Well, I think we are only a couple of minutes over because of a technical fault. So I think we've done really well. I'd just like to thank you, Robin, for joining us this evening. I found it really fascinating. I know that everybody else has too. Thank you very much for everyone who came this evening. I don't know if you have anything final to say, Robin, or are we happy to leave it there?
No, just to say thank you ever so much for inviting me, and it was brilliant to meet you all and hear such kind of range of experiences. Some of them really uplifting and some of them quite a bit tougher as well. But I think that's very much a part of it. And thanks again for inviting me.
Brilliant. And just to remind everybody that we are online on the same Zoom link every Wednesday between 6:30 and 8 o'clock for anybody who wants to come and connect.